Again, it's a rich thing.
What is going on, guys? Welcome back. In today's video we're going to build a simple Zoom clone in Python, so let us get right into it. Alright guys, so we're going to build a simple Zoom clone, and when I say that, of course we're not going to build a professional Zoom-like or Skype-like software. We're just going to build a simple client that is going to be able to stream and receive screen sharing data and camera data and audio data. So just a basic communication tool where you can talk to people using audio, using voice, and also by streaming the camera. And for this, we're going to have to install a library that I have written, which is Vidstream. We've used it in a couple of videos about voice chats and camera streaming and screen sharing and so on before. So what we need to do is we need to open up a command line, cmd or terminal, whatever, and we say pip install Vidstream. Now, always when you're using Vidstream, make sure that you have the latest version because it's still in the buggy alpha, so I'm currently still working on it. Which means that if there are any bugs or if there are any mistakes or if I add some features, they're only going to be in the latest version. So always do pip install Vidstream -- upgrade if you already have Vidstream because of the previous videos where we have used it. So what you want to do is you want to import Vidstream, or actually you want to say from Vidstream, we're going to import almost everything, but not exactly everything, because we're not going to use video streaming, which is another functionality we're not going to use here. And we're going to need audio sender, we're going to need audio receiver, we're going to need screen share client, we're going to need camera client, and we're going to need a streaming server, which is what we're going to use to receive all the data. I mean, not the audio data, because for this we have the audio receiver, but the screen share data and the camera data is going to be received by the streaming server. Now, if you want to include everything, you're going to also include the, video client. So if you don't mind that, what you can do is you can just say from Vidstream import everything, so just a star, and then you're good to go. Besides that, we need some core Python modules. So we're going to need tkinter. So we're going to say import tkinter as tk and as tk and import socket. This is just for getting your private IP address. If you don't need it, or if you already know it, or if you want to statically code it in, you don't have to import sockets. I'm going to talk about that in a second. And we're also going to need threading. So threading is going to be needed because we're going to have many connections. We're going to have an audio stream that we send. We're going to have an audio stream that we receive. We're going to have camera data that we send, camera data that we receive, and so on. So we're going to have to do this in multiple threads. And now what we're going to do first is we're going to get the local IP address. Now you can get your local IP address however you want. You can just go into CMD, for example, and you can type ipconfig, and then you can find your IPv4 address. So actually I can show this. So here you just go IPv4 address. This is your private IP address. It's important that you take the right adapter, because if you have, for example, VirtualBox or some VPN, you're going to have multiple IP addresses, but in your Ethernet connection or in your wireless connection, you would have your IPv4 address. So you can just copy it from here. This is the address. Or you can just get it from Python. So you can say local IP address equals socket.getHostByName, socket.getHostName. This is how you get your private IP address. If you want to have your public IP address, and we're going to talk about why you need your public and why you need your private IP address in a second. But if you want to have your public IP address, what you do is, first of all, you can go to myip.is or any other site that has the service to show you your public IP, and you can just get it from there. Or you can do it programmatically in Python, but for this, of course, you would have to import requests. So import requests, and then you would have to say public IP address equals, and then requests.get, and there is an API from ipfi.org. So you would have to send a request there to https://api.ip. How is it written? IP file like that.com, not .com, sorry, .org. And then from this request, or from the response, actually, we'll get the text. So this would be it. However, we're not going to do it here because that's, not necessary. Now, when do you actually need your IP address, your local and your public IP address? It's important because if you're in the same network, if you're in a local area network at home, what you need to do is you need to get, for example, 2 laptops or 2 computers, and you just have to know the private IP address, the local IP address, because all you need to know the local IP address of the other computer. It has to know your local IP address, and then you can host on your address, it can host on its address, and you connect to its address, and it connects to your address. It's not that simple when you do it in the internet. It still works with Vidstream, but you need to do it differently, because then what you need to do is you always need to host on your private IP address. So later on when we create a server, so for example, server equals streaming server, for example, we need to specify an IP address. It's important that always when you're hosting something, when you're receiving, when you're the host, you need to specify your private IP address. However, if it's in the internet and it's not just in your local area network or even on one computer, what you need to do is the other person needs to connect to your public IP address, even though you're hosting on your private IP address. So let's say we're hosting on 192.168.0.207 or 209, I don't know what it was. That's your private IP address, and you specify a port here, for example, like 999. If the client then wants to connect to that IP address, it does not connect to that IP address unless it's in your same network, so using the same Wi-Fi or using the same internet. If it's coming from the internet, first of all, of course, you need to set some firewall rules so that you allow and you open up that port. But besides that, this person needs to create a client, so for example, a camera client, and then it's not going to pass this address, it's going to pass the public IP address that you get on sites like myip.is, for example. And this is going to be something like, 80.92, whatever. This is going to be the public IP address. So you host on your private IP address and you connect to the public IP address. All right, so this was just a basic explanation how the connection is going to happen. And now we're going to start coding the actual graphical user interface. So we're going to add a comment here, GUI graphical user interface. By the way, let me just show you that this line works. So we're going to print the local IP address, which is the result of the get host name function here, or function call here. So you're going to see that this is the actual IP address. Okay, it was 206, not 207 or 209. We can leave that line here, but the graphical user interface is just going to be buttons and text boxes without any functionality. So later on, or after the GUI, we're going to write the individual functions that are going to open up the connections and so on. And I'm going to tell you how you need to do it if you have multiple clients. But for now, we're just going to design the graphical user interface, so just the UI. And for this, we're going to start with a basic window. We're going to say window equals tk.tk, like that. And then we need to set the geometry and the title. Now, the title is not really important. We're just going to call it neural 9. I don't even want to call it Zoom clone. Let's just call it neural 9 calls version 0.1 or 0.01 alpha, like that. And then we're going to say window.geometry. I think that's the function. And here we need to pass a string with the resolution or with the dimension, with the dimensions. So 300 times 200, for example. It's going to be a small GUI because the actual stream is not going to happen in that graphical user interface. What we're going to do is we're going to have a control user face with a couple of buttons, and then the stream is going to pop out in a separate window. So once we have the window, what we can do is we can just add the elements, and this is very easy, repetitive work. So we're going to say label, and we're going to say target, because what we want to have is we want to have a basic text box where we can enter the IP address of the other client that we want to stream to, and then we just want to have some buttons that can stream to that client and can start listening on this particular client for incoming connections. And for this, first of all, we need a label so that we know what the text box is for. And here we're going to say target IP. Label target IP is going to be tk.label, and it's going to be part of the window, and the text is going to be target IP, for example, or target IP address, whatever you want to call it. And then we're going to just say label target IP.pack. By the way, feel free to design the UI however you want. The main focus is on the functionality, but we want to have a graphical user interface here so it looks a little bit better. We don't have to do everything in the command line. So after that, we're going to say text target IP is going to be tk.text. And here we're also going to say it's part of the window. We're going to add it to the window. And we're not going to say text equals something, but we're going to say the height equals 1, because by default, the text is a whole area. So it's going to be a big text block where we can enter some text. What we actually want is just a text box of height 1 where we can just enter the IP address. And then we're going to say also text target IP.pack. So after that, what we want to do is we want to have a button that says, okay, start listening for incoming connections. So this is just going to be the start button for the client, signaling that it's ready for incoming connection. Before clicking that button, our client is not going to be able to process incoming data. So even if another client streams towards our client, it's not going to be listening, so it's not going to get any streams, or it's not going to display any streams. And after that, what we want to do is we want to have 3 other buttons that say start camera stream, start screen sharing stream, and start the audio stream. So this is going to be very similar for all these buttons. We're just going to have 4 buttons. The first one is going to be the listening, or actually let's call them BTN listen. Is going to be TK button. And this button is going to be part of the window. It's going to have the text start listening. And it's going to have a width of 50. And we're going to add the command later on once we have the functions. And then we're just going to say btn listen.pack. And we're going to anchor it so that it is centered. So anchor equals tk center. And expand equals true, like that. Now we can actually copy that, and we can go ahead and just paste it a couple of times. So here, and here, and here. Of course, we're going to change the name, and we're going to change the text. So here it's not going to be button listen, but it's going to be button camera. Camera, there you go. Button camera. And we're going to say start camera stream. There you go. Here we're going to call it button screen. Button screen. And we're going to say start screen sharing. And last but not least, we're going to say start audio stream. And it's going to be the button audio. Like that. Finally, what we need to do is we need to say window.main loop, and then we're done with the graphical user interface. So window.main loop. And then we can run this. And you're going to see, there you go. I have the target IP, I have buttons that I can click here, but they don't have any functionality. So that's the next step. Okay, so the rest of the script is going to be quite simple. All we need to do is we need to implement 4 functions that are going to do what the buttons say they're going to do. So we're going to have a function that's going to start listening for incoming connections. We're going to have one that starts an outgoing camera stream, one that starts screen sharing to another client, and one that starts the audio stream. And for this, we're just going to go up here and we're going to say def start listening, for example, listening. And the important thing here is that when it comes to listening and receiving, we want to have just one instance. We want to have one server for incoming video connections and one listener or receiver for the audio connections. We don't want to create these instances every time we click the button. So we don't want to have it we don't want to have it like that. We say start listening server equals streaming server and so on. We want to have these things defined above. So we want to have a receiver and a server. So we can say server equals streaming server. Here, of course, you pick the local IP address because we're hosting on a local IP address, obviously. And you pick a port number, for example, 9999. Now, the important thing later on, if you have 2 clients, the script is going to stay the exact same, but you need to change the port numbers. Because if my server is listening on 9999, your client has to be connecting to that port, and your server has to be listening on a different port, and I have to connect on this different port. But we're going to talk about that later on again. So we're going to just say server equals streaming server and receiver equals audio receiver, local IP address, and another port number, like 48, for example. Now, if you want to do it, you can also do it with the client. So you can also define a static or just a single screen sharing client, camera client, and audio sender. But in my script, I decided to just open up 2 screen sharing connections, for example, if you click the button twice. Now, of course, you can just change that if you want. But if you don't want, you just go ahead and say def start listening. And here we're just going to define 2 threads. So T1 is going to be threading.thread. And the target of this thread is going to be server.start listening, or start server in this case. Again, we don't call the function, we refer to it, we pass the function, and then it's going to be executed once we start the thread. And T2 is going to be threading.thread. Target is going to be receiver.start server as well. And then we just started 2 threads. T1.start, T2.start as well. After that, we do it for the other functions as well. So what was the second button? Start camera stream. So here we're going to say def start camera stream. Start camera stream. And here we're going to define the client in the function. So every time you click that button, it's going to define a new camera stream. It's not going to use the one camera stream that we have and do something with it. It's going to start a new one. So we're going to say camera client equals camera client, and now the IP is going to be in the box, so we need to get the IP from the box, and for this we need to say, what was it, how did we call it, text target IP. So we need to say text target IP dot get, and in order to get the IP in the right format without getting a \n in the end and making it unusable, what we need to do is we need to say as a parameter here 1.0 as index 1, and as index 2 we need to pass a string which is end -1c. This is going to just read until the end, but it's not going to have a \n in the end. So we create this camera client, we have the IP address, and we pass the port that we're going to connect to. Again, since we are listening at 9999 and 8888, the other client is going to be listening at 777, for example, or whatever port number you like. But in our case, it's going to be this port number here. So we need to take care that we don't connect to one of those here, because then we would just connect to ourselves. So that's the one thing. Then we say T3 equals threading.thread, and the target is going to be camera client.start stream. T3.start. Again, always take care that you're not calling the functions in here, you're just referring to them. So we don't want to have these brackets here. We just want to, or parentheses, you just want to pass the function here. Then we just copy that actually, and we replace the camera client by a screen sharing client. So start screen sharing, like that. And this is going to be screen client. It's going to be a screen sharing client or a screen share client. And the rest stays the same. Again, I think the port is also the same because we're connecting to the same streaming server. And we're going to replace this with screen client. And we're going to call this T4, even though they're local names, but can never be cautious enough with Python. And then last but not least, we just have, actually we can copy that as well here. We're going to call this start audio stream. And this is going to be the audio sender. Audio sender is also going to connect to the same IP, but to a different port, because as you can see, the streaming server for the video data is on one port, the audio receiver on another port, so it's not going to be on this port. We're going to connect to 6666. And target is going to be audio sender.start stream. And this is going to be 5, 5. And I think we're actually done. So we can now start with the demonstration. My mistake, we can of course not start with the demonstration because we forgot to add the functions to the buttons. So we need to go down here to the button definition. And we need to add, at the end of every button, we need to say command equals. And then we need to say which function is going to be called when we click that button. So we're going to say command equals start listening listening. When we call or when we click the listen button, here we're going to say command equals, what was it, start camera stream, like that. Here we're going to say command equals start screen sharing. I mean, I hope these are the function names. Yeah, there you go. And the last one is going to have the command. Sorry. It's going to have the command start audio stream. So now what we can do, let me first see if we can just run this without any problems. There you go, okay. Now what we need to do in order to get the connection here is we need to create a second Python file with the exact same code, but we need to swap the port numbers. I'm going to do this here on one computer, so I'm going to have two clients running here. One is going to be listening, the other one is going to be connecting and so on. So I'm going to show you that it works. I have, however, tried this with a friend online in the internet, so it works also if you're in completely different locations. It doesn't just work in your local area network, it actually works in the internet out there with someone who's completely in a different place. But I'm still going to just show you here how I do it on my own computer. So I'm going to create a second Python file here, which I'm going to call main2.py. We're going to copy all of the code here. And the only thing that we're going to change is we're going to change the port numbers. So we're not going to listen here on 9999. We're going to listen on 4 times 7 and on 4 times 6. We're going to connect on 4 times 9. And we're going to connect here again to 4 times 9. And down here, we're going to connect to 4 times 8. So if I didn't make any mistakes here, this is going to work. Those are the clients. Of course, we can remove this request here. But in order to show you that it works, I need to turn off my camera because I'm going to have to use the camera in the script. So I'm not going to be able to use it in OBS and in the script. So I'm going to make a cut here and we're going to see the camera in a second. All right, so I turned my camera off, and what we're going to do now is we're going to run both scripts. We're going to run this one in PyCharm directly, so just running it, and we're going to keep it up here, and then we're going to go into the terminal, and I'm going to navigate to the directories, so to neural 9 and to, actually we're here, so we're going to say Python main2py, and we're going to have the second one here, so those are now the two different clients. And I'm going to just enter the IPs, so 192.168.0.206, which is going to be the same IP here because I'm doing it on one computer, one and the same machine. So what we're going to do here is we're going to start listening, and here we're now going to click on start camera stream towards this IP. So I'm going to click here. It's going to take a while. Again, this is not professional software here, so it's going to lag for like 10 seconds or 15 seconds or maybe 20 seconds. Because it needs to establish the connection even if it's on the same computer. So it initially takes some time, but once the connection is established, it works actually perfectly fine. So you're going to see a camera window pop out in a second. Then you're going to see me again. There you go. Now the important thing is that I'm not just showing my camera in Python. The camera stream is coming from this client here to this client here, and this client is displaying the camera stream. So I can now also go ahead and say start screen sharing like that. So it's a little bit laggy now. But you can see I'm doing screen sharing here and camera streaming at the same time. Now I could also start audio. I tried it, it works, but I'm not going to do that. For those of you who saw my voice chat tutorial, you know what happens if the feedback loop starts. So I'm not going to do that because then again, we're going to have very loud noises here, but this works. It works locally. It works via the internet. It's usually also not lagging unless I'm recording. So this should work kind of fine. And this is how you build a simple Zoom clone in Python. So that's it for today's video. I hope you enjoyed and hope you learned something. If so, let me know by hitting the like button and leaving a comment in the comment section down below. And of course, don't forget to subscribe to this channel and hit the notification bell to not miss a single future video for free. Other than that, thank you very much for watching. See you in the next video and bye.